Well, hello everybody. This is Kimberly with Wake Up with KC, and I have an interesting topic to share and to discuss. And I've mentioned recently in my podcast about a horrific experience with my daughter and, what she was going through with anxiety and struggling with that from stress, depression, and those type of things. And I'm learning and discovering that it's a lot of the young adults and the millennials that are struggling with this. And I came across an interesting woman who is also a mother that had similar experiences with her son. And I have her today to share some valuable information and insight that could possibly help you if you're a parent and are dealing with a child that is dealing with the same thing. And please welcome Leisha Mamera.
Hello.
Hello, Leisha. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm just getting my day started. I've mentioned to my audience in my past podcast episodes about an experience that I had that was very horrific and heart-wrenching with my daughter. And she was going through anxiety, and it just bombarded and exploded into a psychosis, two different types of psychosis, and is in a mental facility to get help to find balance. And I thought when I discussed and talked and shared this with you, there was a connection. And you have a similar story of what you experienced with your own son. And can you please share that?
Sure. Well, it's actually two sons now. Our oldest son in sixth grade was experiencing some depression and anxiety and social isolation. He would tell us that he didn't have friends, and the director at the school was watching him and was recognizing that when he walked into the lunchroom, the boys were laughing, and he was taking that on as the boys were laughing at him. So there was something going on, inside his head that was making him feel that way that wasn't actually real. So fast forward, we had taken him to, after seeing this over a course of a month or so, we took him to a psychiatrist who prescribed Prozac. And that horrified me to think that I was going to put my 13-year-old on Prozac. I immediately said to her, "This is a black label warning drug, and you're wanting to put my child on that." And she assured me that she had much success on it, but I wasn't convinced that was for my child. So I had already had a little bit of history with my own personal healing. I had been diagnosed several years prior with Hashimoto's thyroiditis and adrenal fatigue and some hormone imbalance. And I knew that changing my diet extremely benefited my mental health as well. I had been fatigued and had brain fog and felt overwhelmed a lot and irritable a lot. So I knew that once I had gone on my gluten-free and dairy-free diet and got the nutrients in my body that I needed, that tremendously helped me. So that functional medicine practitioner, dietitian, I reached out to her immediately, and I requested an emergency meeting, and she was happy to help me. She just coincidentally, she usually has a 6-week wait list, and she was able to get me in within like 3 or 4 business days. And she had looked at a test that I had done on our son about 6 months prior, a GI test, and it was testing for a gluten or dairy. I was testing to see if he had any bacteria or viruses or parasites in his digestive system, because he had been distended looking. So in any event, once she saw the test results, she said, he has a gluten allergy, and there's a lot of science on the government website that connects gluten with all sorts of mental disorders, ranging from anxiety, depression, to bipolar and schizophrenia. So, in any event, I discussed this with my child, and I sat down with him and said, how you do X or you feel X, and well, Allie thinks that it could be gluten or dairy. I'll back up a minute. Gluten and dairy both break the blood-brain barrier. So what happens when you ingest gluten? Gluten tends to put holes in our digestive system, creating leaky gut, and then it gets into the bloodstream. And that protein gluten and the protein casein in dairy break the blood-brain barrier and affect the opioid receptors. And that's what causes a lot of these mental disturbances. So in any event, I discussed it with my child, and he agreed to do a 30-day detox from gluten and dairy and see if there was any results. And at the end of the 30 days, it was miraculous. Not only did he his mental health improve dramatically, he also had an intermittent exotropia that he had, which was one eye that would diverge. It usually happened later in the day, and he had been in vision therapy for years for it, and that resolved itself as well. So in any event, after 30 days, he told me, "Mom, you told me I only had to do this diet for 30 days, but I want to do it for the rest of my life." And I asked him to talk to me about that, and he said, "I just feel better, and I have more energy, and I'm happier." So in any event, he has continued on the diet, and he has cheated at times because he's exposed to it at a birthday party or at school. The parents bring in these treats that are gluten and dairy, and he feels left out. So he's had to experience the negative effects because it takes him right back into a bad mental state, and he also has his eye diverge. So he's learning. He's 16 now, and he recognizes that that it's much more beneficial for him to just say no to the gluten and dairy than to participate in that behavior that so many of us. Food is such a social. We have such a social connection and with it, and it's really hard, especially at parties and when you're around your peers. But he has recognized how to manage that and the benefits of it.
Wow. It all because of gluten and dairy.
Yeah, all because of gluten and dairy.
And you find gluten and dairy in most of everything.
Well, yes and no. I guess now that we are a gluten-free and dairy-free family, because years later we had a similar issue, which actually was even worse with our youngest son. But I already knew enough to research that a lot quicker. I say that, but in any event, we have been gluten-free and dairy-free now for I have been for 6 years, and so you just learn to adapt. There's a lot of things that are gluten-free. However, you have to be careful because there is greenwashing and marketing. And then also, gluten, I don't think is identified in the mainstream as much as in somebody who specializes in gluten allergy, because every grain has gluten in it. But in the grocery stores, you'll find that a lot of the gluten-free items have rice flour in it. It's a very small amount of gluten, but it's still gluten. And oat, even though you'll see on the shelf that they are gluten-free oats still have gluten in it. So there's a lot of education that comes with maintaining a gluten-free diet. It's just safer to be grain-free, which is what we are. And I occasionally give them rice and oats, and I soak it overnight. So we try to break down that protein, even though it's a small amount. And it seems manageable. It may be creating some inflammation in them, but I don't want to, I want to give them a little bit of feeling of eating normal foods and variety. So if you eat, fruits, vegetables, clean proteins, nuts and seeds, and then all the flours that are nuts and seeds, then you can actually have a variety of foods. And we've just adapted and we feel better. So it's easy.
Okay, so how would you even know if you're having a gluten allergy? What would be the signs and symptoms?
So that's a hard thing to diagnose, because I think that so many people, I couldn't even guess the percentage, but if I was to guess the percentage based on, I've heard several different percentages, and that's why I say I don't really know, but I mean, I've heard up to 80% of people have a gluten, especially in the United States, have a gluten allergy. It's non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So celiac is the autoimmune disorder that comes as a result of a continued gluten allergy. And then non-celiac gluten sensitivity is just that it's creating the inflammation in your body, and your body is attacking that protein because it knows it's not supposed to be in the bloodstream. So
Right.
so if you go on ingesting it long enough, then your body does create an autoimmune disorder. For myself, it created Hashimoto's thyroiditis. For our youngest son, he was in the beginning stages of Tourette's. So he had tics on his mouth and his hands a little bit shaking. So that's how the doctor diagnosed that he was in the beginning stages of Tourette's, just knowing that he had the gluten sensitivity, and then he also had Tourette's. So, we got our diagnosis through functional medicine practitioners. I got mine, and Ethan got his. I got mine through a functional medicine dietitian, and he got his through a functional medicine doctor, and my youngest son got his through another functional medicine doctor. And our youngest ended up taking a genetic test, which showed that both my husband and I have the gene. So, that diagnosed my husband and I, or confirmed me and diagnosed my husband. And then as a result of the genetic test, that told us that all of our other children most likely had a gluten allergy as well. So just, incidentally, our daughter, we put the whole family on the grain-free diet, grain-free, sugar-free, dairy-free diet when we had diagnosed our youngest son. And after she got off of the diet, after 90 days, she decided to eat some dairy, and she had all these pains in her legs, which prior to the diet, she had complained every once in a while of growing pains, and she was getting treatment for tendonitis. And she was out of sports the entire spring the year before. And so in any event, she started having these pains and then went back on the diet, and then would eat the dairy again every once in a while. And she's the one that finally made the connection that her tendonitis and her, what she thought were growing pains, was a dairy allergy. But back to your original question about how to diagnose this, it's gluten and dairy create so many different symptoms. For me, it was digestive. For my boys, it was, mental, more so. After I had gone on the detox diet, if I ingest gluten, it causes me to vomit. Prior to that, all I felt was bloating, and I had brain fog and fatigue and irritability. But you wouldn't really associate that with a gluten allergy. I mean, most people wouldn't. I thought it was just part of aging at the time. I didn't think there was really anything wrong. The only reason I went to the functional medicine dietitian was really to see what sort of supplements and foods I could eat to try to, feel a little bit better. But I did not suspect a gluten allergy when I went originally. So most people probably just accept it as part of aging if they're an adult. And it's just, we normalize these symptoms. But we've had some radical improvements by going gluten-free and dairy-free, and surprise improvements like my son's intermittent exotropia resolving itself. And my youngest son, he had all sort of skin issues that resolved itself. One of the worst being he had 2 cysts on the back of his head. One was quite large, and the pediatrician recommended, for him to either leave it and just let it be because it was benign, or if it bothered him, to have it surgically removed. And my son wanted it surgically removed because it bothered him. And 6 weeks into the diet, his cysts on the back of his head had gone away. 2 weeks into the diet, all of the mollusca, he had like all these bumps on his neck, on his knees, on his arms. The ones on his neck and shoulders were the size of like small warts. And within 2 weeks of us going on this grain-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, and bean and legume-free, because what happened to him, this is our youngest son, what happened to him is the allergy had gone on for so long and created so much inflammation in him that he quit absorbing nutrients. And as a result of him I shouldn't say quit absorbing nutrients, he wasn't absorbing nutrients as efficiently. So he was only getting partial nutrients daily. And then a lot of bacteria and viruses started taking over his digestive system. So he had a dysbiotic amount of candida in his body, which is a yeast infection. He had a staph aureus, this dysbiotic amount that kills people in the hospitals. You hear about people getting staph infections. But yes, so he had a dysbiotic amount of that in his digestive system. He has 2 forms of strep. He had a dysbiotic amount of mold, 1 form of mold. He had heavy metal toxicity. So what was happening in his body is his body wasn't able to detox all of this that it normally would if it was healthy. So it just, it created this cascade of effects, and he couldn't focus. So he was in class and getting in trouble because he wouldn't do his classwork, but his brain was so inflamed that it hurt him to do his classwork physically. So instead he was doing what any 10-year-old would do, and that's act out. So so that, that's a whole nother issue. I mean, it created a lot of pain for us socially because people thought he was a wild child or a troubled child or whatever they thought. But my husband and I could feel the social, some people, pushing away from us socially. And that was hurtful and painful because these people we thought were our friends, were not there for us in our greatest time of need to support us and understand us. And also the teachers at school and the administrators. I had one administrator tell me that, the tail's wagging the dog, implying that our parenting is not good enough and that we needed to get on top of this, or once he's a teenager, we're going to have a lot of problems. So there's just, this assumption that just because a child is acting out, it's a parental issue. And that wasn't the case because for our youngest son, he went from having really bad behavior and acting out. And, he was like a motor. He definitely had symptoms of ADHD. He needed to walk around the classroom all the time. He couldn't sit down. He had a really tough time focusing, constantly telling my husband and I he hated us and wouldn't hug us and frowning all the time. It was, mid-November, we started the diet. Mid-February, the child would come down in the morning with a big smile on his face and come up and hug me and tell me he loves me and wanted to, really, that was about a month period that he didn't get enough hugging me. And I think that was because, he was starting to feel better, and he maybe, I don't know what he felt at the time, but it was a huge transition. And so it really pains me that there's so many kids out there suffering and being judged. And it's it's possibly the food that they're eating, and most likely the food they're eating. I mean, I've experienced it in our family with, myself and my 2 sons. And so, yeah, I know I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Wow.
Your initial question was just,
No,
how
no,
do you
but
diagnose it?
then,
It's a really
yeah,
hard question to answer.
but I mean, yes, and then I go, well, what about the adults, the older, like our
Right,
generation, and
right. I mean, there's so many,
even our parents and parents that if it was all because of the food, because our food
right,
has changed in history of what we're eating and what we're intaking, and I feel it's causing a lot of health issues now, and people are
absolutely
not
aware.
wakening up to
Yeah.
what if there I feel like there needs to be more education on this, more awareness,
Hmm.
and do not be ignorant. And you mentioned from a nutritionist, dietitian that formed a test that gave the result of the gluten
Hmm.
allergy. What kind of test is that, and where can you go to check that out, to get that test to see if you have a gluten allergy? How would somebody get
So,
access to that?
okay, so that's a great question because most people go to their doctor and for everything. So conventional doctors do not test for this. I'm not sure why, but I have my suspicions, but I won't go there. Um, so you have to go to a functional medicine or an integrative doctor to get these tests, and um, they will test, in different ways. The one that my youngest son went to tested him with a stool test, a blood test, a urine test, a saliva test, and a genetic test. So there was a lot of testing, and all of them confirmed that he had the gluten and dairy allergy. So so in any event, finding that functional medicine practitioner could be difficult, but if you're in an urban area, there are several, and I think that there are more and more that are coming up. I mean, I would Google functional medicine doctor, and I think some websites. I need to look into that. Some specific websites that you can go to find a functional medicine or integrative doctor in your area. But your regular conventional allopathic doctor will not test for this. Um, you know, it's been a really interesting path with my pediatrician, because we do go to the pediatrician for the regular well checkup, to get, the physical and, the vaccinations that we have done. And so in any event, I've shared with them some of this information, and they're polite about it, but they say that they don't believe in it. So and I actually, when our children went to I can't remember if it was the 10-year or 11-year checkup, that they do a baseline heart evaluation, and the doctor has to draw blood. So I said I would like to get a micronutrient test done while you're drawing blood, just to check, because I don't want to have to draw it twice. For these kids, it's traumatic drawing blood for some children. And so, they looked at me like I was crazy asking for that, and said that they don't recommend something like that, but they'll do it for me. So, I wish I could tell you to go to the regular doctor and they would know what they're doing, but you're going to have to find a functional medicine practitioner, I'm afraid.
Wow. And what's really sad is that these doctors are not, they got their license and whatnot, but they're not continually educating and being informed based on, things that have changed. And, they're like, people that, deal with weight issues and whatnot. Why don't they check to see, well, wait a minute, there's something to this. Maybe this might be the true, root to the issue that you're dealing with, and not just label a diagnosis because it's a similar, you know, symptom or diagnosis. That there've been, I think it's like a program. Oh, because they see so many patients. Oh, you're just like this other patient that has this, and you automatically want to diagnose them. I'm a believer in, let's process of elimination to get to the root of the issue. Like I'll hear what you say, but I'm not going to believe it until I have further like evidence and feel like it has to resonate with me. Like, oh, this might be a something to look into more. I feel it, and I think our bodies are trying to communicate with us, give us these signs. But then you go to a doctor and it's like, oh, well, you got this, and it doesn't sit well with you. And you're like, and being a mom, we're like, I don't know about that.
Right, right. I mean, you're exactly right. There's so many different things that goes into health. And Kimberly, you doing what you do know about the ACEs of childhood that can even affect health. The adverse childhood events that can affect your health in the future, depending on how many ACEs a person has. Emotional, physical, sexual, divorce. Emotional, physical, sexual abuse, or divorce, or other things are some of the ACEs. And the higher your ACE number, the higher your chances are of getting a disease as an adult. So, it could be just trauma that is keeping you from, being the healthiest you, keeping your body, because your cells have this memory in them, and that can prevent you from being healthy. So it really is. You have to peel back the layers of the onion, and that's what I've been doing on this journey for the past 6 years. And I continue to get better myself. So, originally it was the gluten and dairy, and I keep adding to it. Now I'm up to, meditating an hour every day. And I continually feel better and better and better. So you're absolutely right to question the doctor if it doesn't feel right. And really, in my opinion, this is, some people may not agree with me, but I think that taking a medication for an acute, some acute reason, you have to go in for surgery for, something acute, a car accident, or, my son had to go in because he broke his arm and shattered his elbow. So medicine in that situation, yes. Acute pain, yes. In some situations, maybe not all situations, for the pain, depending on what the pain is. And then, maybe an acute infection, not a minor infection. I don't necessarily think that ear infections always need medication. Right. There's a lot of natural ways that I've learned to treat a ear infection. So I think that the overuse of medication to treat symptoms has created a lot of our problems and a lot of our health issues. That's added to it. And I don't think it's necessary. I think that it really behooves a person to be the investigator and go and peel back the layers of the onion and figure out the root cause. And you might not get to the root cause immediately because, like I said, it could be something as far back as childhood. But, our bodies are able to handle a lot and overcome a lot. And so it takes years to get to disease. So it's going to take some time to get back to health. And you just have to just keep working at it a little bit at a time, and don't get overwhelmed. And, I am one for putting the work in. I always say, pay now or pay later. And I'd rather pay at the grocery store and pay with time in the kitchen than pay at the doctor's office or in a hospital. So I agree with you, Kimberly. And I think that more people need to take a different approach to the way that they're looking at their symptoms and or diagnoses.
And not only that, but I do agree with you when, I have a mindset and a philosophy of when I see other people and they behave a certain way, like, oh, wow, they're going through something. I wish them well, or they get better, because you don't know what somebody actually is going through. And,
Right.
The younger generation with social media and everything, I try to teach my kids, like, hey, don't be judging You don't know what
Mhm.
they might be going through. And sure enough, they find out, oh, so and so was da da. I'm like, see,
Mhm.
before you think a negative thing about somebody else or talk ill about somebody, stop and pause and wonder what they're going through because you've been through some stuff too.
Yeah,
A lot of people don't know what's going on in somebody else's life. That's where you show compassion for that person, no matter what.
exactly,
So,
exactly. I have a line that I use with my kids all the time. Hurt people. And it's generally the people that are hurting that tend to be hurtful. So, if you reframe that thinking, you can have empathy for that person.
mhm. Well,
Mhm.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your story and your experiences and what you've discovered about gluten and dairy could be the root to a lot of health problems with so many. And thank you so much for taking this time to share it with us.
You're welcome. I mean, it is, gluten and dairy is a big factor, but there are other factors. Toxins
Mhm.
are a big factor as well. So I just encourage anybody to, you know, be their own advocate and do the research and take on the challenge of doing the detective work. It'll really pay off. It made radical changes in our life, and we're so much happier for it. It's definitely transformed our whole family unit. So it was worth it, and it was totally worth it for me.
Well, that's great to hear. And thank you again, Leisha. And I look forward to talking to you again soon on Wake Up with KC.
Thank you. Bye, Kimberly.
Bye.
This is Wake Up with Casey. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I hope this episode helped you. Join me every Monday and you can reach out and say hey at wakeupwithkc@gmail.com. Have an amazing week and talk to you next Monday for more amazing topics to share with you that you don't want to miss.
Stay tuned for another episode with Wake Up with KC.